Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at AI in medicine,
Yeah, AI in medicine.
specifically how it's being used in research. And
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of papers here.
we do 8 to be exact.
Big paper.
All about how these large language models are transforming healthcare.
Yeah, it's really an exciting time to be following this field.
It is. And
There's so much going on.
there is so much going on, so we're going to try to unpack
Try to break it down.
some of the key findings
Yeah,
from these papers. And yeah, like you said, these papers cover really diverse range of applications.
they do.
Really highlight the potential of AI in medicine.
Yeah.
Everything from, diagnosing Alzheimer's disease
Mhm.
to making sense of those complex medical codes.
Yes.
Even helping doctors make better decisions.
Yeah, so these large language models, or LLMs,
LLMs, as they're called.
they've really kind of opened up this whole new frontier in medicine.
Yeah, they have.
They can process huge amounts of data, massive.
Way more than a human can, obviously.
Yeah.
Understand complex medical language.
Mhm.
And even generate text that sounds incredibly human-like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was really interesting was how they're being used to tackle that challenge of diagnosing Alzheimer's disease
Mhm.
earlier and more accurately.
Yeah.
That's huge.
That's huge. And that's actually one of the papers we're diving into today.
Yeah.
That's by Francesco Tumento and Mingming Liu.
Okay.
And they really focused on this major obstacle in Alzheimer's research,
Which is
the lack of comprehensive diagnostic reports
interesting.
for training AI models.
I see.
So to get around this, they actually used GPT-4 Mini,
Okay.
which is a type of LLM,
Okay.
to generate their own synthetic reports from a data set called OASIS 4.
So instead of being limited by what's out there,
Right.
they basically said, hey, let's
Create some of our own.
create our own and train the model.
Exactly.
Using those. Exactly. And what they found was they were able to generate pretty accurate
Wow.
diagnostic reports just from analyzing images,
Really?
which is really cool because that means that you could potentially diagnose Alzheimer's much earlier
Much earlier
than we can now.
than we can now. And that's a game changer for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Early diagnosis is so crucial for, managing the disease.
Absolutely.
Potentially slowing down its progression.
Yeah. I mean, if you can catch it early,
Yeah.
you can do a lot more.
Absolutely. But a diagnosis is only part of the puzzle,
Right.
right? You need to understand, what's the reason?
The why.
The why
Behind it.
behind it. And that's where I thought this other paper
Yes.
was so interesting. This is by,
Shuai Niu, Jing Ma, Liang Bai, Zihou Wang, Yida Zhu, Yunya Song, and Xin Yang.
okay, so they developed
They developed an LLM called ClinRagen.
Clinrega.
Yeah, and ClinRagen basically generates these clinical rationales.
Interesting.
Explaining the why behind a diagnosis.
Oh, so it's not just saying, this is what we think is going on.
Right, it actually gives you the thought process.
The thought process.
And connects the dots between the patient's data and, all that medical knowledge that's out there.
So it's really pulling from all of that.
Pulling from all of it.
And it's almost like giving doctors a window
Mhm.
into how the AI is making decisions,
Exactly.
which I think is
Yeah, just
huge
so
for
you-
this to be accepted
Yeah, and trustworthy.
and trustworthy.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and one other cool thing about their work is they were able to use this thing called rationale distillation
Okay.
to transfer the reasoning abilities from this large, complex model
Mhm.
to a smaller, more accessible one.
So making it more accessible.
Making it more accessible, which means that
to maybe areas that
different healthcare systems.
healthcare systems that might not have all the resources,
Exactly.
the computing power,
Good.
could actually use this.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving from diagnosis to a more administrative but still really important part of medicine.
Okay.
Let's talk about ICD codes.
ICD codes. Those
Yeah,
are
those are used to classify diseases and procedures,
right.
and they're essential for things like billing and research and tracking health trends.
Yeah. Anyone who's had to deal with those knows that they can be a real headache.
A real headache.
Yeah. So Zaid Bookers, Amir Ali Khan, Kwasi Ramadan, and Kong Yang
Yes.
decided to tackle that problem
Tackle that problem using LLM.
using LLMs.
Yeah, and they've been working with the LMA architecture,
LMA.
LMA, which is a type of LLM,
Okay.
and to classify ICD codes from medical discharge summaries.
Oh, okay. So those are often packed with,
Yeah, dense medical jargon.
jargon.
That's really hard for a human to even sometimes understand.
Right.
But LLMs seem to have a knack for making sense of them.
Which makes sense because they're really good at
Processing language, understand context.
context, exactly.
Yeah. So their research really focused on two main approaches.
Okay.
One was using LMA as a direct classifier.
Okay.
So taking the discharge summary and directly assigning ICD codes based on what it says.
Okay.
And the second one was using LMA to actually enhance the input for a different type of model called,
Oh, this is where it gets a little complicated.
it's a little bit, yeah, called multi-ResCNN,
Okay.
which stands for multifilter residual convolutional neural network.
Okay. What is that?
So that's a type of deep learning model that's really good at analyzing sequential data, like the words in a sentence.
Okay.
But sometimes it needs a little help
A little help.
understanding those nuances of, complex medical language.
Medical language. Yeah.
Yeah, so Bakkers and his team use LMA to kind of pre-process the text.
I see. So it's almost like Llama's translating it
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
into something that
Something that the multi-ResCNN can understand.
can understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then based on their findings,
Mhm.
Both of these approaches seem to be promising. Okay.
For improving the accuracy and the efficiency of ICD coding.
Which could have a significant impact.
Huge.
Really free up healthcare professionals.
Yeah, less paperwork.
Less paperwork, more time with patients.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. But amidst all this enthusiasm for, all this amazing AI and all this potential,
Right.
it's also important to ask, are these LLMs,
Are they living up to the hype?
are they living up to the hype?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Kenyu Chen, Jian Yu, Shan Chen, Che Liu, Zhongwei Wan, Danielle Bitterman, Fei Wang, and Kai Shu set out to explore.
They did.
So they really wanted to put these LLMs to the test.
Put them to the test.
And compare them head-to-head
Head-to-head.
with traditional machine learning models
Yeah.
for these clinical prediction tasks. And I'm really curious to hear what they found because...
Well, they actually developed a benchmark
Okay.
to do this called ClinicalBench.
ClinicalBench.
Which is essentially a set of standardized tasks
Designed to assess how well different models perform
in real world.
in real-world scenarios.
Scenarios instead of, just theoretical problems.
Exactly.
Really putting them through their paces.
Yeah, and what they found was really interesting.
What did they find?
They found that LLMs did great in some areas like natural language processing,
Okay.
but they didn't consistently outperform traditional machine learning models.
So it's not just a simple case of new is always better.
Right.
It's more nuanced.
It's more nuanced.
And
You really have to look at,
the task.
the task at hand and what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
Exactly. But now, speaking of specific tasks, let's shift our focus to a particular area of medicine
Okay.
where LLMs are really making an impact.
Okay.
Pediatrics.
Now, that's an area where,
Specialized knowledge.
specialized knowledge is crucial.
Sure.
Because children have very different needs.
Very different
Than-
than adults, and that's what makes the work. By Dingkang Yang, Jinji Wei, Dongling Xiao, Shunli Wang, Tong Wu, Gang Li, Mingcheng Li, Shuabing Wang, Ji Wei Chen, Yi Zhang, Qing Gaoshu, Kei Li, Peng Zhai, and Lihua Zheng. So exciting.
That's a lot of names.
A lot of names.
Okay, so what did they do?
They actually developed the first Chinese pediatric LLM assistant
Wow.
called PediatricsGPT.
PediatricsGPT. So it's like having a pediatrician in training
Yeah, kind
powered
of.
by AI.
Powered by AI.
That's incredible.
It is pretty cool.
So I'm assuming they trained it on
Massive.
a massive amount of data specific to pediatric care.
You got it. They created a data set called PedCorpus,
PedCorpus.
which has, all this information from pediatric textbooks and guidelines and clinical notes, even knowledge graphs. So
So it's really comprehensive.
it's really comprehensive.
That's fantastic. So,
Yeah.
this is really amazing to see how these LLMs can be tailored to specific fields
Absolutely.
to provide, even more targeted support
Yeah.
for doctors.
Mm.
But as impressive as these models are,
Yeah.
how do we know that they're actually reliable
Right.
in real-world clinical settings?
That is the question.
Yeah.
And that's what Sunjin Qian, Jun Kim, Haiyang Kwok, Dongchul Cha, Hang Il Yoon, Guanyin Kim, Jiwan Yang, Sunyin Wan, and Edward Choi wanted to explore.
Okay.
They recognized that a lot of these existing benchmarks for evaluating LLMs in healthcare weren't really capturing the complexity of real-world clinical scenarios.
So they were basically saying, these look good on paper,
Right.
but how do they actually perform?
When you're dealing with real patients.
When you're dealing with real patients with real data,
Right.
that's messy. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they created a new benchmark called EHR Note QA,
Okay.
which is specifically designed to assess how well LLMs handle information
Right.
from electronic health records.
What?
And it's built on this large, publicly available data set called MI-MyPhi,
Okay.
and it uses real clinical questions derived from discharge summaries.
Oh, so it's not just like, testing their general knowledge of medicine.
Right.
It's
So
actually,
they extract
can they extract
information
that's relevant
from
from a patient's actual medical history?
their actual medical history. That's
Yeah.
that's crucial.
It's a much more practical
Yeah.
and rigorous way to assess how these things are actually going to perform.
And, I think it's great that researchers are really pushing for these more realistic
Realistic.
evaluations.
Yeah.
Because it really does give us a better understanding of how they might actually perform in the hands of
Doctors, nurses.
doctors and nurses.
Exactly.
But let's not forget that AI, even with all its potential,
Right.
can sometimes make mistakes
Yeah.
and even sometimes hallucinate information.
Hallucinate.
Yeah. And that's where I think this next research.
So Jin Seo, Zhongwen Lim,
Yeah.
Dongjun Jiang, and Haiyopil Shin
Okay.
comes in, and they really focused on developing this benchmark data set and evaluation system.
To detect these hallucinations.
Oh, so they're fact-checking.
Yeah. Basically,
on AI.
yeah.
Making sure that it's not making things up.
making sure it's not making things up. And that's really important in medicine, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because accuracy is paramount.
Yeah, you need to be able to trust the information that's coming out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And their system, which is called DAHL, actually breaks down
Uh-huh.
the LLM's output
Mm-hmm.
into smaller units
Okay.
and checks each one
Each one.
for factual accuracy.
Okay.
So it's a very fine-grained analysis
Great.
that allows you to really see where these hallucinations are occurring
And how they're occurring.
and how they're occurring. Yeah.
Which is,
Super important.
super important. I mean, we need to be able to trust the information these models are providing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think this is fantastic work.
Yeah.
But even when these models, get everything right,
Mhm.
there's still a question of whether domain-specific training
Right.
is always necessary.
Is it always necessary? Yeah, like, do you always need?
That's what Daniel P. Zhang, Pranav Mani, Saurabh Garg, Zachary C. Lipton, and Michael Oberst wanted to know.
They wanted to know, is it always better to have a model that's specifically trained
Trained on medical data.
on medical data, right?
Yeah.
Because it seems intuitive that you would
Right, you would think so.
think so.
Yeah. Well, their findings are pretty interesting.
What did they find?
They actually found that in a lot of cases, those general purpose models,
Yeah.
the ones that weren't specifically trained on medical data, did just as well or even better
Wow.
than their specialized counterparts.
So what does that tell us about these general purpose models?
Well, it tells us that they're really good at picking up patterns in relationships
In the data.
in data, even when it's outside their specific training domain.
So it's almost like they can apply that broader knowledge
Yeah.
to reason about medical concepts that we hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And that opens up some interesting possibilities.
Absolutely.
Because it could mean that we don't always need to go through the time and the expense
Right.
of training these specialized models
For every task.
for every task.
Yeah.
But
there are definitely going to be times
where you need them.
where you need that specialized knowledge.
Right. So it's really about figuring out when is it best to use what.
Exactly.
It's a balancing act.
It is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is really fascinating stuff.
It is.
I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
And I'm really struck by, just the sheer volume of research
Yeah, it's amazing how much is going on.
that's happening in this space.
Yeah.
I mean, all those researchers we just named,
Yeah.
all working on these different aspects of this really complex puzzle.
And it's moving so fast,
It's moving so fast.
which is exciting and a little bit scary.
It is a little bit scary. I think, one of the big takeaways for me
Mhm.
is just the importance of careful evaluation. Absolutely. Whether it's comparing
LLMs to traditional models,
LLMs to traditional models or
developing those benchmarks,
developing benchmarks
and
or
detecting hallucinations.
detecting hallucinations. I mean, researchers are really putting these models through their paces.
Yeah, they are.
And I think that's absolutely essential.
It is. We need to understand both the strengths and the limitations
Before we just,
before we throw them into clinical practice.
throw them into clinical practice
Yeah.
because that could be
Dangerous.
dangerous.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you think are important when we're evaluating these LLMs in healthcare?
Well, I think one of the big ones is the ability to generalize to new data.
Okay.
We need to make sure that these models can perform well on data they've never seen before.
Right.
Not just the data they were trained on.
Because otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the real world is messy and unpredictable
It's unpredictable, and you're going to encounter all kinds of new data.
all the time. And the models have to be able to adapt.
Adapt and learn from that.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Well, another crucial factor is transparency.
oh, yeah, we talk about that.
Talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
We need to understand how these models are making decisions.
Not just trust the output,
Right.
right? Because particularly in healthcare,
The stakes are so high.
the stakes are high.
These decisions can have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. So transparency is crucial for building trust.
Yeah, both for the healthcare professionals
And the patient.
and the patients. Right. Because if they don't understand,
Right.
they're not going to accept
They're going to be hesitant.
the recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, we can't forget about
The
the ethical considerations.
Yeah.
Because we want to make sure that these models are being used responsibly
and fairly.
fairly, and not perpetuating biases.
Right. Or even creating new ones.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's something we need to be
Well,
really
be very careful.
mindful of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think those are conversations for another time.
Yeah. Another deep
We're
dive.
going to go deep dive.
Perhaps.
Because I think we've covered a lot of ground
We have.
in this first part.
Yeah. From diagnosing Alzheimer's to improving ICD coding, specialized models for pediatrics, evaluating those hallucinations.
It's been quite a journey.
It has been a lot of information.
And we're not done yet.
We're not done yet. We've got more to come.
We've got more to come. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll delve even deeper into the implications of these findings, talk about the potential impact of LLMs on the future of healthcare,
Yeah.
and discuss some of the broader societal and ethical considerations.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good.
One of the things that I keep thinking about as we
Yeah.
talk about all this stuff is, what does this mean for the role of doctor?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Uh.
I mean, with AI getting so sophisticated,
Right.
it's easy to sort of imagine this future where
Robots are doing everything.
robots are doing everything,
Yeah.
yet doctors are replaced by algorithms.
Right.
But from what I've been reading, it seems like most researchers really see AI as a tool
Like,
to augment and enhance the capabilities of healthcare professionals, not replace them entirely.
Exactly. It's really more about a collaboration. AI can handle the things that it's really good at, like
Right.
analyzing those massive data sets, identifying patterns,
Yeah.
suggesting potential diagnoses, and then doctors can focus on what they do best.
Right, the human side.
The human side, building relationships with patients, providing empathy, and ultimately making those crucial decisions.
Yeah, where you need that human judgment
Exactly.
and intuition.
Yeah.
So it's really about giving them the tools
Giving them better tools.
to provide even better care.
Exactly. And this could lead to, a more efficient healthcare system overall.
Yeah.
Imagine AI, streamlining workflows, reducing those administrative burdens.
Yeah, get rid of all that paperwork.
Get rid of the paperwork and even personalizing treatment plans based on a patient's,
unique.
unique genetic makeup or their lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really exciting to think about the potential benefits.
It is.
But with any powerful technology,
Right.
there's always that, concern about unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
So how do we make sure that these AI-driven tools are
Accessible.
accessible to everyone, regardless of their
Socioeconomic status.
socioeconomic status or, where they live?
Geographic location.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that really highlights the need for, careful and equitable implementation.
Equitable implementation
Yeah, we need to be mindful of potential bias.
in the data.
And the data, and the algorithms, and
Yeah.
the way it's deployed.
Because if we're not careful, we could actually end up
Making things worse.
exacerbating these existing health disparities.
Absolutely.
And I think that ties into, this bigger picture of what AI means for society.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, this is
We're talking about
a paradigm shift.
a paradigm shift, not just in healthcare,
Not just in healthcare,
but in all aspects
of our lives.
Of our lives.
Yeah. And, as we continue to develop these systems, it's so important to consider the ethical implications.
The ethical implications, yeah.
How do we make sure that, these AI systems are aligned with our values?
Right.
That they're used for good, not for harm.
Yeah, those are big questions. And I don't think there are any easy answers.
No.
But I think it's something we need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Having those conversations.
Yeah, the society.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really enjoy about
doing this.
doing this show is that, we can explore these complex issues.
Yeah. And hopefully
Hopefully.
spark some conversations
Spark some conversation.
among our listeners.
Yeah. So if you're listening, we want to hear from you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
What are your hopes and concerns about the role of AI in medicine?
Yeah. What kind of future do you envision?
Share your thoughts in the comments.
Share your thoughts. And if you want to dive deeper into any of the research that we've been discussing,
Yeah.
check out the show notes for links to all those papers.
Absolutely.
And,
Do your own deep dive.
do your own deep dive. It's a fascinating world.
It is.
It-
And, I can't wait to see what the next few years bring.
Me too. Me too. I think we'll be talking about this
Oh, yeah,
a lot more
for sure.
in the future. But for now, I think let's kind of shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and get back to some of the specific findings
Okay.
for the research.
That's good.
One of the things that really stuck with me from all this research we've been talking about
Yeah.
is that work by Daniel P. Zhang, Pranav Mani, Saurabh Garg, Zachary C. Lipton, and Michael Oberst.
Oh, yeah.
Their findings about,
General purpose.
general purpose versus specialized models
Yeah.
were really surprising.
It really does kind of challenge the assumption that you always need a model trained on medical data.
Right. Because it seems like common sense
You would think,
that the specialized model would be better, but
but the research shows
the research shows
it's not always the case.
not always the case. And it really raises some interesting questions, I think, about
How they learn, how they generalize.
how they learn, how they generalize, right? Because even without that specific medical training,
Right.
they're still able to
Pick up on those patterns.
pick up on the patterns and the relationships in the data
Yeah. It's like they can apply this broader knowledge base
to reason about these medical concepts.
in a way that we hadn't really thought about before.
Yeah, and that opens up a whole new set of possibilities for,
How we develop and deploy these models.
how we develop and deploy these models, right? Because it could mean that we don't always need to go through that time and expense of training these specialized models for every single task.
Yeah, especially in areas where, medical data is scarce,
Scarce or hard to get.
hard to obtain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, of course, there are times when
Absolutely. You're going to need that specialized knowledge.
you're going to need that specialized knowledge.
Future.
And I think that's where the real,
The art
comes in, figuring out
When to use what?
when to use what.
Yeah, exactly.
When do you need the general purpose? When do you need the specialized?
And that's going to require a lot more research and collaboration.
Collaboration between, AI experts and medical professionals and data scientists.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all evolves
Absolutely.
as we learn more
About these models,
about these
their
models.
capabilities and their limitations.
Yeah, well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
A lot to think about.
You've covered so much from, the potential of LLMs to revolutionize healthcare,
To the ethics.
to the ethics, to the evaluation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clear that AI is going to play
A huge role.
a huge role in shaping the future of medicine.
Yeah.
But there are still many
Challenges and questions.
challenges and questions
That we need to explore.
that we need to explore. So
It's a very dynamic and rapidly evolving field.
it is.
I'm really excited to see what happens in the next few years.
Me too.
Yeah.
And to all of our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring these topics.
Stay curious.
Stay curious, stay informed.
Be informed.
The more we understand about AI
And its impact.
and its impact on healthcare,
The better.
the better we'll be able to navigate all this,
Yeah.
this exciting future that's coming.
It's going to be an exciting future.
It is. It is. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious.